Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. As you're getting connected, just take another minute for folks to join in with us. Thanks so much for coming. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give one more minute for folks to join in and connect to audio. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, so let's get started. We have a pretty full agenda. Welcome, everyone. We're so grateful for you to tune in today to Equitable Planning and Planting. This is the second in a learning series on urban forestry and tree equity hosted by American Forests. My name is Lita Aljabar. I'm the Senior Director of our Catalyst Initiative here at American Forests. And through this learning series, we are really hoping to rapidly expand the cities and organizations and actors out there across the United States that are, taking action on tree equity. So we're hoping to support you with the tools, the know-how, resources, and capacity to be able to take action on such a critical challenge of climate justice and community health with trees really at the center. So American Forest, just a little bit about us. We've been committed to forest conservation in both large landscapes and urban communities throughout our 150-year history. Our policy team has worked really closely with the Forest Service and a coalition of partners to help unlock an historic $1.5 billion in funding for urban and community forestry. We know many of you may be recipients of that funding, maybe working with us, or maybe are partnered with a recipient of that funding, or just, perhaps just interested in seeing tree equity as a climate solution in your community. So as pass-through funders ourselves, we wanted to bring municipalities and local partners together to offer our services, that of us and our partners, to help catalyze this equitable tree cover as a climate justice solution. So I'm really excited to see right now we've got over 50 attendees representing cities, organizations, faith-based groups, nonprofits from across the country. We see you all here, and we're really excited to go through this learning series and to continue being your partner in this effort even after today's workshop. So let's get started, and we can hear from the real experts in the room. Right. So our goals for the series. So through this series, we're really here again to provide each of you with the resources that you need to catalyze tree equity locally where you are. We are bringing in voices from across the country, across disciplines to showcase innovative tree equity work in action, like today with our partner in Indianapolis, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. And lastly, but most importantly, we want to learn more about you. So we want to understand what needs do you have? What barriers are you coming up against? What are you thriving at? So that we can help support and expand this in the long term. Just a couple of quick notes, maybe housekeeping on this side. So we're going to follow this presentation with a panel discussion, and we'll be taking questions from you throughout the webinar. So please submit a question through the Q&A feature that you see on your Zoom dashboard. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And then lastly, throughout this series, including today, we are sharing some tools from American Forest and our partners. And these tools are really supplemental and complementary to some of the existing federal or national tools that you might be working with, especially if you're a part of a federal grant award right now. So these tools that we share are really, designed to work in concert with those other tools to help you target even further your forestry investments for the highest need communities. Next slide. So today we have a rockstar panel for you all of experts in urban forestry, community engagement, and social environmental equity from both American Forests and our partner at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. So Joshua will help us with kick us off with a recap from our first webinar and what we learned and covered in that session, Tree Equity in Action. Carly Weedman will share in-depth action stories from her work in the field in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Alexis will walk us through a free-to-use tool, the Community Action Guide, that's really designed to support you in taking action on a lot of the themes and practices that you're going to hear about today. So then we really want to hear from you. So we're carving out some time here to take your questions and start off a dialogue with this panel here. So with that, I'll just turn this over to my colleague Joshua Simon to get us started.
Thank you, Lita. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Joshua Simon, Senior Manager of Community Engagement. In my role, I ensure that our tree equity programs are delivered to your community in a meaningful and impactful way. So in the first webinar, we highlighted the National Explorer Tree Equity Score tool. We shared impact stories of tree equity and how two unique cities working towards tree equity and utilizing the national tool to guide the tree plantings. One being a smaller city in the South, Natchitoches, Louisiana, with a population of 28,000 people, and the other in the Northwest, Tacoma, Washington, population of 219,000, much larger than Natchitoches. Both cities have their own unique and special community engagement strategies. Although we shared the many groups that attended those plantings, which included high school students, the fire department, even the mayor and their staff, we did not go into great detail and share the techniques on their specific approaches to get those people to the table or to their tree plantings. In this section, we will take it a step further and share how another local partner is using tree equity tools and community engagement to achieve tree equity. Next slide, please. So remember, we started in the South, we went to the Northwest, but now let's make another stop. Today's story represents the Midwest. Marion County, Indiana, which is where Indianapolis is located, has a population of 968,000. And the reason I emphasize the various populations, and because I want you to know, is that using our tree equity tools partnered with intentional community engagement can be achieved in your city as well, regardless of your geographic location and population, guiding you on a journey of equitable planning and planting. Marion County was already included in the National Explorer, a place where we've had multiple partner-led tree plantings, over 150 trees planted, which led to the co-creation of our deep dive tool, Tree Equity Score Analyzer, where our local partner was tasked with outreach to build and lead the TESA Stakeholder Council process, identifying tree planting locations as well. A key component of those projects includes equitable community engagement. And we're speaking of community engagement beyond just posting flyers around town, posting on social media, or just inviting our regular attendees. We're talking about community engagement strategies that takes engagement a step further. Our work in Marion County is not done alone. At the forefront of that work is our partners, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, KIB, a partnership that I truly think supports tree equity by leading with the community inclusive decision-making, building trust and transparency, and empowering community members to take ownership in their greening of their neighborhoods. They have joined us today and will share their successes, their failures, and just their overall experiences of mobilizing tree equity in Marion County using TESA and other various community engagement strategies. And now I'll turn it over to Carly from Keep Indianapolis Beautiful to share some of their tasks that they've been doing.
Well, hello and good afternoon. Thank you, Joshua, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm thrilled to be able to share some about Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, our community forestry team, how we utilize community engagement and tools to inform our decisions, and hopefully that either clarifies some of the work that you're doing or inspires you in your urban forestry work. So a little bit about Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. We are a nonprofit based out of Indianapolis and Indiana. We have about 30 full-time staff currently, and we are an affiliate of the Keep America Beautiful National Network, and we are actually the largest affiliate of that network. Our mission is to help people and nature thrive in our communities, and the way that we do that is through 4 primary programs, which include the Clean Neighborhoods program, which is our litter abatement program, our green space program, where we work in and with communities to create small pocket parks in neighborhoods across our city. Our native landscape program, where we are removing invasive species and restoring native landscapes by replanting native plants and trees. And finally, our community forestry program, where we plant urban trees throughout our city, which is the program that we're going to focus on today. So we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So a little bit about our community forestry program. So we plant about 3,000 trees annually across the city every year. All of those trees are native to Indiana, so all Indiana native species. And an interesting thing about our tree contracts is that included in those, we maintain all of our trees for an additional 3 years after they are planted. So once a tree goes in the ground, our team and contractors go out and water all the trees, mulch all of the trees, and prune all the trees to make sure that it sets them up for long-term success. So that's a little bit of a very broad overview of our program. I think a couple of other interesting points to note before we dive too much further in is about our contracts, our funding contracts that we operate under in our urban forestry program. So we have 2 primary contracts that fund our work. The first is through Citizens Energy Group, which is our local gas, water, and utility. They actually have contracted us to plant 10,000 trees throughout the city in our combined sewer overflow basins to help with stormwater runoff as a part of some renovations that they are currently doing to our combined sewer overflow system here in the city. And then our other primary contractors through the city of Indianapolis, through our Mayor's Office of Sustainability. So we plant another 1,500 trees with them annually, primarily in rights of way or any publicly owned land, such as city parks in our city. So I think that's a really interesting partnership for us because we don't have a team of forester professionals in our city who are out planting trees. We're doing that work with three full-time staff in our community forestry team. But we work with thousands of volunteers throughout our community to get all of this work done. And so that has been a really great partnership that we've had with and in partnership with the city to plant the trees and to increase our urban tree canopy here in Indianapolis. So that's a little bit of an overview about our community forestry program and how it works. So next slide, please. So now that you know a little bit about our program and what we do and some of our metrics and numbers and funding, I want to talk about our decision-making process. So this is a map of Indianapolis and some available plantable space. We have some restrictions about where we can plant because of our contracts, but there's a lot of right-of-ways, there's a lot of public land, and there's a lot of space in those combined sewer overflow basins. And we have a very small team and we're planting 3,000 trees. We have to be really careful about where we're deciding to spend our time, energy, and resources. And it's definitely been a learning process. Keep Indianapolis Beautiful has been in existence for just about 50 years now. And definitely has been trial and error over time that I think have led to the practices that we use today. We did not always use maybe the best practices in the future and had some negative interactions with some community members, feeling like they were having things done to them and not with them. So that really allowed us to kind of step back and look at the way that we were approaching our community forestry decision-making process, and which eventually has led us to the process that I'm happy to share with you today. So we can go ahead to the next slide and share a little bit about what that process now looks like here at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. So you'll see there's 3 main buckets that we utilize to make decisions about where we're going to plant trees in our city. The first, of course, is our community forestry decision making. We also engage with our community engagement team, and then we also use data to support all of the decision making that we're doing. And you'll also note that at the top of all of those is equity, and we really try to keep equity as our guiding star for how we make decisions, utilizing community forestry information, community engagement, and data, all to work towards using our resources equitably to have the most impact in our community. So now I'm going to go into what that looks like for each of the different areas here. So first is the community forestry. So that's very important when you're planting trees. They're the ones who have to find plantable space, plot out trees, submit an 811 ticket, mark all the utilities, do a conflict review with the city to make sure that we are not working against any sort of large projects that the city is working on, arranging tree orders, GPSing the trees afterwards, and also working on tree maintenance and closeout. So they're really focused on all of the logistics about where we're planting, making sure we get all the supplies, tools, and trees that we need, and getting those trees in the ground. The next part is our community engagement strategies that we use to support the community forestry work. So we sort of have two levels of community engagement that we operate under when it comes to community forestry. One is sort of on an ongoing basis where we are throughout the year continuing to attend neighborhood meetings, connecting with neighborhood associations, and just really trying to be involved in conversations that we're really connected with and understand what's happening in our local communities. So those are going on throughout the year, no matter what we might have going on, in a sort of general basis. And then per each tree planting that we do, we have a very specific set of action items that we follow as a part of our community engagement processes. So about 1 month out ahead of going to a planting, we will go out and we will canvass the neighborhood. So any tree that has been plotted to have a tree planted in front of it, we will go and knock on their door with a team of staff, volunteers, board members, and try and have a conversation with them if they are home. If they are not home, we will still leave some information with them. And we'll also leave a mailer about a week later will be mailed to their address with additional information about the planting. About 1 to 2 weeks prior, we'll leave a little white flag in the ground that shows there's going to be a tree potentially planted here, has our conversation again, or has our contact information. Again, they can reach out to us if they have any additional questions, concerns, things they want to talk about. And then also on the day of planting, our community engagement staff members go out into the neighborhood before trees are planted, just in case they catch anybody who's out. Maybe somebody's left us a note, maybe somebody has questions. So really trying to, before all the way up to the planting, creating opportunities for community members to be engaged with us, to learn about what we're doing, but also to opt out if they do not want to have a tree in front of their homes. I think that's something that we have really learned over time, is that we're really, if our goal is to try to get people to value trees and see them as a resource, we don't want to go and put trees in front of people's homes who really don't want to have them there, and really recognize that they have their own valid life experiences, or they may have negative associations with trees. They're the ones who are going to have to deal with any downed limbs, any leaves, that kind of thing. So we really try to be respectful and understand and be in conversation, and understand what's going to be best for that neighbor. And really our goal is to get what we call rejection. So if somebody does not want a tree for whatever reason, we want to get those before a tree ever goes in the ground. Because once that happens, then it is a conversation with the city and you need to get a FLORA permit to dig it out. And that, again, creates frustration and unhappy neighbors, which is what we're trying to avoid. So between attending the meetings and then having conversations with neighbors, we're really trying to get a feel for if this community is open to having trees, if they have any concerns, and really want to make sure that it is a positive experience for them. Because we're trying to do this to help the neighborhood, not to do something that they're not actually interested in. So all of those factors go into our decision making, but also making sure that our residents and neighbors are informed before we ever go into where they live and start to plant trees there. Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit about community forestry, community engagement, I also want to talk a little bit about how we have used data and how that ties into the conversation we're having today. So we, of course, use a lot of data, information, maps when we're doing our community forestry planning and decision-making. But because we have that focus on equity, at the beginning of our last strategic plan about 4 or 5 years ago, we looked at how can we make decisions in an equitable way using data and information, and came up with what we call our NIT score. So that's the Key Neighborhood Identification Tool here, which is very specific to KIB. It includes not only social vulnerability indicators, things like the percentage of canopy cover, concentrations of litter and dumping. We do use this for all of our programs, so you might see some non-tree things in here. But it also includes what we call our KIB program score. So that's the amount of dollars or time that we have invested into neighborhoods in the past. So factor that in as well to make sure we're distributing our resources equitably. And essentially identified a top 10 neighborhoods that we were going to focus on throughout our strategic plan, which you can see identified here. So that was how we had been using data to really inform our decisions of making these as high priority based on some social indicators, but as well as some KIB program investment. So when the opportunity arose to work with American Forest to customize a tool to help us to make equitable decisions about urban forestry, we jumped at the opportunity, and we're really, really grateful to be a part of that process. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looked like, and then I'll go into a case study of how we've used some of this work. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is what our experience working with American Forest to create our local tree equity score analyzer looked like. It was about a 6-month process, and we worked with American Forest to facilitate conversations with our community. So KIB was the one who was identifying stakeholders, which ranged from people at the city to neighbors to community partners, people who worked in urban forestry, and some who had no knowledge about urban forestry, because we really wanted this to be a tool for our community. So made sure that we had a really wide range of viewpoints, opinions, perspectives present as part of this process. And then throughout those 6 months, we had a stakeholder council that met regularly for feedback and ideation. We also hosted one-on-one interviews with community members to get a little bit more in-depth feedback. We worked with a group of data and GIS analysts to help pull local data sets to inform this work, and ultimately have a really great tool that is localized with some local data, information, some things that were really important in making decisions about urban forestry for Indianapolis. And now we have a really great tool that we can add to our toolbox when we're trying to make equitable decisions in our community forestry program. So now that you know a little bit about the background and how we got to where we are now, I want to go into a case study of what all of that looks like in action, using a planting that we conducted last fall in the Spades Park neighborhood. And you can see a photo from that planting, which includes some of our friends on the call today, Joshua and Alexis, who were able to come to Indianapolis and plant as a part of this planting with us. So next slide, please. So this case study is about a neighborhood on the near east side of Indianapolis called the Spades Park neighborhood. You can see a map of the area here. It's kind of an interesting area because it has a city park that runs through the middle of it, but it also is surrounded by neighborhood homes on either side. There's a railroad pretty close nearby and some factories, as well as an interstate pretty nearby as well. So this space came to us as an application from our community. So that is one way that we do identify potential plantable spaces, is allow our community to apply and let us know that they have space available. We generally don't plant anywhere unless they have space for at least 30 trees, just for our own capacity. And so this one came through to us through a community application. So we get a lot of applications throughout the year, and they kind of go into a repository, and that we sort of look those through at the beginning of every season and decide which ones we might be able to take on, making sure that we're spreading out throughout the city. And so when it came to the fall, we're looking at our plantings, and Spades Park was on the list. And so we receive an application from the community, and then we start that process that I spoke about at the beginning, where we're looking at it from a community forestry perspective, from a community engagement perspective, as well as a data perspective. And then for this planting, we also utilized the tree equity score analyzer as well, to make sure that this was an area of need in our city. So next slide, please. So when we're making our decisions, we're kind of looking at the fall season. This particular neighborhood was in our top 25 knit neighborhoods. So not the top 10, but it was definitely still among the higher needs. And then we also utilized the Tessa tool to see what was going on in this neighborhood, what the need was there, and to make our decisions. So this is a snapshot from the Tessa tool for the block group that includes the Spades Park neighborhood there, which is highlighted. So a few interesting things to note. It does have a tree equity score of 83, which is not low. It's a decent score, but it did put it into the moderate priority, which we felt like still was a high enough priority for it to be an investment of our time. But there were also some interesting things that you'll see here on the matrix graphic, that it does have really high on the heat disparity. There's a significant number of people in poverty. There's a pretty high health burden index. So there were certainly some areas here that indicated that this would be an area where adding some additional trees would be of benefit to the community. So it was really nice to have this as an extra tool. Got lots of positive feedback from our community forestry team, is just having this as a really easy way to kind of look at a neighborhood and gauge whether or not is a high need for trees. So that is a snapshot of a way that you can use the Tessa tool to kind of do a high level assessment of a neighborhood before you ever go in there and start doing any sort of work. So through all of that, sort of a high level, a look at the space, we decided, yes, it has plantable space. Yes, it has more than 30 trees. Yes, it is considered a high need area. So let's start doing some work there. Because it was application based, we had already been in conversation with the neighborhood there. So we already knew there was some interest from the neighborhood in wanting to have those trees. So it checked off all the boxes from community forestry, community engagement, as well as from a data perspective. So next slide, please. All right, so now that we've decided we are going to plant in this area and we're moving forward for our fall planting, that sort of triggered our community engagement process in addition to the community forestry doing their planning. So what did that look like? It looked like attending neighborhood meetings in the Spades Park area. We met and had a conversation with the neighborhood association president, who was just absolutely lovely and great. She was there on the day of the planting and just could not be more grateful and excited to have had the opportunity to have some trees planted in her neighborhood. We also did go out and canvass this neighborhood, so walked on and knocked on every single door that was there. I actually was a part of that canvassing team. I had some really great conversations with folks there. And you just learn so much from going and having conversations with neighbors. I found, there's just little nuances about who lives there and what they prefer. And so it was really great to have a lot of really great conversations and learn a lot about the neighborhood. One instance that happened at this particular canvassing, which I think just highlights the importance of doing this kind of work, is that we were speaking to a gentleman who lived on one street. And when he answered the door, he informed us that he had already gotten a mailer, a door hanger about a tree planting. And we said, we haven't been here. Can you show us what you had? And it turned out that the city was actually doing some sidewalk reconstruction there, and they were going to be planting some trees from a different contract on that same street. Didn't come up in our conflict review because of a timing issue. And so again, that is just a really great way, a great reason to just go out and ground truth the work that you're doing, because you just never know what you're going to find out. You also might find out that maybe there's a fence in the area you think you might plant, or maybe there's, somebody parks their car there and you just aren't going to want to plant a tree because they might plow it over. So we went and canvassed with the neighborhood. I think overall we got really positive feedback. And left some information for folks there if we weren't able to connect with them during the canvassing. A week later, we sent our mailers with information about the planting, where they can contact us if they do not want a tree or if they have additional questions. Went out a week or so before and put a flag down so you can see there's what one of our flags look like, lets them know a tree is coming their way. Again, where to find us if they have questions, and then had a lot of conversations on the day of the planting. You can see some of our members of the community engagement team there. So they went out again while our volunteers were getting ready, while trees were sitting in front of people's yards to have conversations and again, see if there were any concerns, any questions that can be answered. I remember in this particular planting, there were several people who had left notes in their trees to say either they didn't want it or they'd rather give it to their neighbor. So again, it's just really being in conversation with those communities so you can make decisions with them that are going to be in their best interest as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, so after we did all the planning, looked at all the data, did all the community engagement, we had just an absolutely amazing day at Spades Park. It was a like gorgeous fall day, 60 degrees sunny, like truly could not have asked for a perfect day. So here's some shots of some of the volunteers. I think we had about 100 people there, and it was just a really fabulous day. All right, next slide, please. So overall, this is what we were able to end up doing in that neighborhood. We planted 152 large trees. You can see some of the demographics of the individuals that we impacted. And this was all pulled from me inputting the scenario into the Tessa tool after we had planted all the trees. So going by right-of-way, that was something unique that we added to our tool, was putting the right-of-ways in there, because that is largely where we operate from. You can see we planted in 14 right-of-ways on one parcel, which was actually in the park, I believe, and then one total block group. So by putting all of that in, that shows us this overall summary of the work that we did, where it was located, and the demographics of people that we had and impacted. Next slide, please. So that's one of the really great things about the Tessa tool that I have really found beneficial, is not only using it at the beginning to sort of identify where you can allocate your resources, but also it can show you the benefits afterwards. I think we all know that trees have a lot of benefits, but this is really great to be able to show the different benefits that it has, from how much carbon is sequestered, to the stormwater runoff that's prevented, to the pollution that's removed from the air. There's even an ecosystem service value. So if people really want to know how much dollar value this is adding, there's lots of really great information for community, for potential funders, just to really show the impact of your work. So this was, again, from the scenario that was created for this planting in the Tessa tool, another really great way that you could use the tool for your community plantings. Next slide, please. All right, so this is what the overall planting ended up looking like. And I wanted to show this because I think it highlights a few different things. Number one, we GPS and track all of our trees. So this helps us to understand where we've planted, what trees are, and track survivability long-term. The other thing that I will note is that you will see some black dots on the screen, and those are our rejection sites. So those are things that because of our community engagement process, we determined that they were not going to be a plantable site for this planting. And we keep those in there because if for whatever reason we might want to come back to this community, we know that for some reason somebody did not want a tree here, or it was an unplantable, determined to be an unplantable space for this site. So you can see that we did plant 152 trees, but from our original plotting, we did have 24 sites that were rejected. So it is it's not an insignificant percentage, but again, we don't look at that as negative. We look at it as a success because we had conversations, we went and ground truth, and we figured out before we planted a tree in the ground that somebody didn't want, that for whatever reason, that tree was not going to be viable for this project. And we still were able to plant 152 trees in this neighborhood that they didn't otherwise have. So that's how we track on our back end the plantings, and then you can see an overview of how and where the trees went for this planting. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's a little just before and after of what the neighborhood looked like before, and then there's some of our lovely trees planted. So really just, I think it's going to just be really great for this neighborhood to have some additional greenery in their rights of way. All right, next slide. Okay, so just some quick takeaways that I would say from this information is just to be curious, not judgmental when it comes to community engagement. Everybody has their own life experiences that are valid, and we want to make sure that we're understanding those, again, because they are the ones that are going to have to live with these trees, to help to take care of them, deal with any sort of unintended consequences of them. But they're also going to be the benefactors, right? Like they're going to be the ones who have beautiful trees and better air and reduce storm water runoff. So just really trying to meet community where they're at and being curious about their experience versus putting your own perhaps judgments on them before you ask them. Also using data, community forestry, and community engagement together to make decisions. I think, using one of them, they all have their own benefits, but they really work great when you put all of those things together. So you get a full picture of your community and how you can use your resources. And definitely use the tree equity score analyzer. As I said, it's really great about making decisions, but also to show your impact afterwards. And continue to just look for ways to improve and additional tools you can add to your tool bucket. And then just wanted to think a little bit about the future of community forestry at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. I think we've learned a lot. I think we've made a lot of improvements, but we're always continuously looking for opportunities to improve our programs and our processes. I would say a few areas that are just ongoing for us are continuing to identify and secure sustainable funding sources, which is always the challenge. Our citizens contract is ending, or we're renegotiating our city contracts, just making sure that we have funding sources to sustain our work. Also expanding options for plantable space. Right now, we are limited to planting in rights of way. Potentially, there's additional funding sources or programs or strategies we could use to plant in more spaces in our city. And then also just continuing to refine and improve our processes and practices. We know, again, that we've learned a lot. We feel really proud about the work that we have done. But just continuing to make sure that we are doing the best we can do. And if there's ways that we can improve or refine the work that we're doing, continuing to look for opportunities. So I'm really grateful for tools from the American Forest team, like the TESSA tool, and then also the community engagement guide that we're going to talk about here next. So I will, I think, pass it off to Alexis to show us that tool.
Thanks so much, Carly. That's a really great view into your work in Indianapolis, and I think that's a really great launching point to talk about the Community Action Guide. This was a resource that was developed and launched by American Forest last year. Real quick, again, my name is Alexis Gomez. I'm the Senior Manager of Community Engagement at American Forest. And like Joshua, my job is really to make sure that we have meaningful engagement with stakeholders in the places that we're working. And one of those efforts has been through the development of this guide. Before getting into it more deeply, I want to acknowledge equitable engagement is hard to do. It's a people-driven process, and people are dynamic, they're diverse. Add on to that challenging project timelines, other competing demands, and it's not surprising that we all feel like we could do community engagement a little bit better. But in that, we understand the struggle, and because we've also experienced it. And so in that, we're here to support that effort. And beyond any single project or tree planting event, equitable engagement speaks to your approach to implement tree equity. And that's an effort that we want to see you succeed in. That's our goal with the Community Action Guide. What does it do? It's meant to set best practices for equitable engagement in forestry. And while tree equity is the focus in it, it has applicability to lots of other topics. It's a step-by-step guide to plan and implement that community action. And it's a free digital resource published on Vibrant Cities Lab. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the URL to explore it further. And we invite you to do that. We'll share the link at the end of this presentation. But who's it for? It's meant to support a range of scales on community action. So from municipal staff working on community initiatives to community and place-based nonprofit organizations who may have some of those more direct relationships with residents, to frontline environmental justice orgs, and really the smallest unit of organized groups of community residents. So think about those block clubs or other residents who are looking to help coordinate their actions around tree equity. This has applicability to all those ranges, and we invite to see the creative ways that you might use them. So the Community Action Guide will take you from planning to implementation by helping you to, one, understand tree equity and help your community see what that means to them, to determine the community's priorities and find alignment with tree equity. Number three, to identify the existing community assets and gaps to see what you need to work on in a community and what you can leverage. And number four, to set goals and take action. So from defining those goals to assessing what is achievable in your specific timeline. As the name implies, the guide is meant to be actionable. So what that means is that there's step-by-step guidance to take you from that planning to implementation. There are worksheets included to aid in to be used in your planning. Along with the worksheets, there are exercises that are for you to adapt and use in your own engagement process. And throughout the guide, there are linked resources to dive deeper into select topics. Throughout the process, these resources were curated and specifically added here to add depth where needed throughout the guide. And so again, I want to emphasize that every context is different. And so the guide is meant to be used in a way that works best for your situation and your community. With that, I'm going to switch my screen over to the guide itself to walk through it and talk a little bit further about the planning process. Just 1 second. Okay. So when you use that direct link that was on the slide before, you'll arrive at this page where you'll find a lot of the same information that I just covered that will help orient you to the guide. On every page, you'll see 4 phases and the relevant steps below each one of them as you hover. Since much of the guide is meant to be hands-on, this is really useful to refer back to earlier sections as you move throughout it. Like I mentioned, there's information here that will help orient you. Again, like I mentioned, the intended audience, some more information about how to use it, and further below with related resources and definitions that are used throughout the guide. Now I'm gonna hone in a little bit on the first part, which is a lot of the planning included in the community action guide. Acknowledging that there's a lot more that can be covered, and I invite you to do that after this call. But so to begin, there's this first step titled Background and Context for Tree Equity. To begin any engagement process, it's really important to get on the same page with your team and with the community you'll be working with. This section provides summary information about what tree equity is and some historical context for why we have the inequities we see in our communities today. Many pages of the guide have suggested activities at the bottom, as well as tips. Like here, that you could assign, for example, you could assign this section as background prior to a meeting with your team, or use it to develop talking points for a 10-minute presentation at a neighborhood meeting. As you can see further up, there's also some visuals that may help ground some of this information and that you might find useful in your own communication. If I go back to the top, I'm gonna go to the next step to explore your community's tree equity score. A lot of this portion, again, is directed at planning. And so it's a lot of the work that you're doing before you've gone out into the community and really done your formal process. And so here I want to elevate the point that Carly was making about the role of data in community engagement and using it to elevate the community's experience and feedback. Community members have significant knowledge about their neighborhoods that come from that daily lived experience. So they should be recognized as experts. And this exercise is meant to help to do exactly that. In this exercise, which also you'll find throughout the guide, are available through downloadable worksheets, like shown here. In this exercise specifically, there's this table that pairs along with tree equity score. So you could look up your own community, specify the neighborhood that you're intending to work in, and then go through this question list. And then you could also use the data that gets collected through these questions to start a conversation with the community. So for example, this table lists questions like, what is the tree equity score for the particular neighborhood? What is the tree equity score for 2 to 3 surrounding neighborhoods? What is the percentage of children in that neighborhood? If I go further, there's questions about the surface temperature. These are all the quantitative data points that are provided through tree equity score, and you can use this to collect. And then further down, there are specific reflection questions. And so these questions are meant to bring out the narratives that the numbers might not capture. So for example, is there anything surprising about the data? What feelings or thoughts about the community does the data bring up that the data does not show? As an example, my own neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan has a tree equity score of 65. It's got a heat disparity of almost 10 degrees above average for the city and a high health burden index. What I've learned in my 6-7 years in this neighborhood is that the neighborhood also has a really strong network of neighbors and block groups that are well connected with city staff. And those relationships have helped neighbors show up for each other after storms have taken out power lines, and city services have been disrupted. That's a data point that might not show up specifically in the data, but really might inform my approach to a tree planting strategy or where I want to target, because those are factors that are really important in that community's resilience. And so an exercise like this can be used in community meetings. You could use it in a smaller format, information gathering sessions, one-on-one interviews, perhaps with individuals in the community. There's really lots of possibility of how to adapt this. And then lastly, in this planning phase, I just want to show where how this is structured. So this section, for example, really requires some reflection and asks that you be ready with pen and paper or keyboard to write down these thoughts that will help frame out your approach. I won't go into all the details, but for example, this first section prompts you to consider your own position and assumptions. For example, if you work for a municipality, how will residents perceive you if you attend a neighborhood meeting? Is there a history of distrust of government in that neighborhood? Have you thought about how you will need to address those concerns as you go and reach out to the community? This is just a snapshot of what's included here. But along with, for example, are there common assumptions that you should consider, as shown in the box on the right? Such as that maybe education is the missing piece to getting community members to support your work. I think that's an assumption that many of us make in our field, but may not consider that community members already have the knowledge, but may have competing priorities to why they are or not involved or supportive of our work. These are all important considerations to make, and this process invites you to document and respond to in your approach. Throughout the rest of this guide, there's similar structures of prompts and questions and exercises to help you develop your approach. I'm gonna go back to the presentation to close out a few thoughts. So by following the process outlined in the guide and building off of much of what Carly shared, you can expect that if you follow these steps, people will sense that you're genuine in your intents. And your authenticity will help build that trust with the community. As part of building that trust, you'll provide value to community members because they'll gain access to information, tools, and resources that'll help them feel more connected and informed to what's happening in their neighborhood. And finally, when people see themselves in that work, they'll feel ownership over projects, which ultimately leads to long-term success. Consider this when you go to plan long-term stewardship of trees and how residents are eyes on the ground of what happens day to day in a neighborhood. They can tell you what is going on and inform you so that you can adapt your approach and respond to the future challenges that may come up. So again, the guide is really meant to be adapted. Every context is going to be different. And so please explore it, tell us how it goes, and that'll help us keep building on it and improving in the future. The link is here again. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lita for our next step.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Alexis, Joshua, and Carly, for your really super compelling presentations. And, Joshua for setting the stage, Carly for really giving us that insight to what it's like to do with this work in your community in Indianapolis, and Alexis for kind of stepping us through how those of us on the line might be able to enact some of these principles where you all are. So I want to definitely let's make some room for conversation with our panel. We've been collecting questions throughout. Please continue to add them in. Just in the interest of time, actually, I think I'm going to make a quick announcement here. So while we have the screen up, Alexis, do you mind going to the next slide? Great, thanks. So before we get into, I want to preserve as much time for that Q&A. So I wanted to just leave you all here with this. We will have a third webinar in this series. Our upcoming workshop is March 28th. It's focused on workforce development, growing careers. So we're going to be looking holistically at workforce development opportunities in communities with a local partner called The Works, Inc., based in Memphis, Tennessee. So we'll send that information through. But now let's come off screen and take on some of these questions that you all have been sharing in the chat. So Alexis, you can close out the presentation. Thanks. All right. So, okay, we've got a few questions in here, really interesting and interested in more insight into your process, Carly, at KIB in Indianapolis. So a few questions, kind of a couple around identifying exactly like planting sites themselves. So maybe kind of getting from the tool to that actual site on the ground. So a question around how do you identify the planting sites, but also maybe there's a question here about how you might determine how much sort of plantable space is in a given neighborhood. So is that, Doris has a question, it says, is that a desktop spatial assessment or a field assessment? Are you looking at right-of-way and public land, or does it look at private land itself? So maybe you could share a little bit about that process, Carly.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, our community forestry has some tools that they are using to identify available plantable space. The tool that we use is called Tree Plotter. And so that's where we both plot and plan for our trees and then also track those afterwards. We are particularly looking at rights of way. So like I said, we only plant in a publicly available space just based on our contracts. And then absolutely, you can only know so much. The data is only as good as updated as it is, right? And so we definitely rely on our on the ground canvassing and just going to sort of analyze the space to confirm our data. So again, I think that's a theme here, is just combining the real life with the data to really make the most informed decisions. So that's kind of how we approach that process. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Sort of related to kind of the planting process and scoping that out. The question has come in, and maybe it's been addressed in some way, but I think may be helpful for others. How do you factor in climate change when choosing tree types? And if so, how? I know others in American Forest have seen that play out in other communities as well. So Karen says, for instance, native Indiana trees won't be native in, say, 2030 or 2050. So as Indiana heats up and becomes Zone or 8. So Carly, we'll start with you and then maybe hear from others in American Forest. How do you factor climate change in when choosing tree types?
This is a really great question, because actually, as a part of the work that we did with American Forest around the TESSA tool, we simultaneously were doing some work with American Forest and the National Institute of Applied Climate Science to do some analysis about tree survivability and species survivability in a changing climate. So love that that's a question that several are thinking about. And so the answer is yes. And so we are really grateful to have that opportunity to look at the species that we are planting and which ones may be vulnerable to future changing climates. Luckily, most of the species that we currently plant are not susceptible. And so it didn't really actually affect our current planting plans very much. But definitely is something that we're thinking about, right? Like planting trees is a long-term game. And so we want to make sure that they're going to survive for years and years and years and decades. So appreciate a couple folks bringing that question up. And yes, that is something that we have definitely been considering now and future thinking.
Great, thank you, Carly. Joshua or Alexis, you work with different communities across the country. Curious if you have anything to add on the climate resilient planting and planning.
I always try to encourage them to maybe reach out if there's not an actual plan or some document that kind of states what trees are most susceptible in the future. I try to encourage them to reach out there, maybe a county extension to see, or the county forester to see what type of trees there are, what kind of research they have going on. Because as you said, the climate is definitely changing, it's definitely getting warmer. So there's a way they can maybe reach out there, county extension or some other resources. I always encourage them to just find other places, because the tool doesn't quite factor that in, but the tool group with other research, other resources, can allow them to help them make a more informed decision.
Great, thank you. So we have a question in here about how, assume this is for you, Carly, how do you find and manage volunteers? A couple of questions around volunteers. So one from Iora is, how do you find and manage volunteers? And we're hearing from Jeff as well about this concept of community planting. So volunteers, digging holes. So 150 in a day planting is really well done. So we're curious to hear how you approach at KIB finding and managing volunteers in your efforts.
Yeah, so I think finding volunteers is an ongoing process, but we have a couple of strategies that we use. We have a calendar on our website where folks can find all of our projects that we have and always invite folks to sign up there. We attend community events and have tables to share about volunteer opportunities. We send information out in our emails and social media. When we're canvassing and going door to door to neighborhoods, we do include the opportunity for neighbors to come out and plant with us. And oftentimes they do take us up with that. We really like when that happens, that they're not only benefiting from the trees, but also helping us to do that as well. So really just trying to find people where they're at and use several different strategies, both of in-person and then some digital strategies as well. Or maybe working with a community partner in that community who might have some active and engaged volunteers are a few strategies that we use.
Great, thank you.
Oh, and then I was going to answer the question I think Jeff had is we do use just shovels mostly and manpower to put our trees in. Every once in a while we do have to get an auger out, but yeah, mostly it's our volunteers out there working hard.
Yes, sweat equity.
Yes.
Sweat equity, absolutely. Great. So we've got some question as well. Want to kind of close here, maybe connecting some of these dots here with you, Carly, in your work, and Alexis and Joshua elsewhere as well. Kind of maybe curious, what has been one of your greatest learning experiences when working in communities with tree planting? Where have you kind of learned the most?
Yeah, so actually it's interesting. This is an interesting question because I've been in this role for just about over a year now. And so I've been learning a lot from being here, but I think it's just really I think like Alexis said, assuming that folks who live in their communities are experts on their communities and really being open to listening to them and utilizing that as a way to build relationship and build trust. And ultimately, I think that it's a bit counterintuitive sometimes, but I think that actually ultimately builds towards our larger goal of folks seeing and appreciating the value of having trees in their communities. And so I think the data and the community forestry and community engagement all together just really creates this really great picture. And so just, yeah, I think it's just the conversations I've been able to have with community members and learning about the things that are valuable to them and concerning to them has been really great.
One thing I've noticed is the amount of people that have never planted a tree, or the amount of people that only see trees in one light. And so to kind of see them dig a hole and put a tree in the ground, but also like you have to eyeball to know where how the depth of the tree. So some people just say, I'll throw it in the ground, put some soil on top, and we're good to go. It's like, no, there's a little bit of a science and a practice to this. And so just kind of chatting with them and find out that some of them never planted trees, or they haven't planted trees since they were a kid. And so just kind of talking through them and them learn their experiences and just casually telling them the different benefits trees have. I think it's something that I always find eye-opening and enlightening to me. Just say, yeah, you are, been on this earth a while, but you've never planted a tree, but allow this to be your first time, just the joy that they have once the tree is finally done, especially if it took a while to dig the hole or a while to get it out of the even pot that it was delivered in.
Right. Thank you so much. Alexis, any quick thoughts to add before we close out?
Mostly just reemphasizing points. I think similarly, my assumptions have been challenged so many times from me assuming others have never interacted with the trees to them telling me, about the tree in their backyard growing up that provided shade for the whole community and everybody came over, to vice versa about them being experts on trees. And so it's just that the continual reminder of letting yourself be surprised and not making assumptions about those you're working with.
Great closing words. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I feel like we're really honing in on the people part of tree equity here, and that's really where it all starts and what it's all for. So appreciate that, everyone. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Again, you know where to reach me. We'll share our contact information. We'd love to continue supporting you. Thanks to our partners, Carly Weedman at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, for sharing the story. And we'd love to see you next month on growing careers as part of our series. So thanks again and have a great day.